Something historic has just taken place on the world stage, and it happened with Canada at the center. At the APEC Summit 2025, Prime Minister Mark Carney met with Chinese President Xi Jinping, and in that single meeting, Canada's role in global politics may have been rewritten. This was the first time in 8 years that a Canadian Prime Minister sat down with China's leader. And yet, what stood out wasn't the handshake, the protocol, or the cameras. It was the atmosphere. Because while Xi's meeting with Donald Trump was stiff, tense, and guarded, his meeting with Mark Carney was warm, open, and remarkably relaxed. And that contrast told the world everything it needed to know. Mark Carney has transformed Canada's reputation, from quiet observer to global player, and the world is responding.
It is a pleasure to meet you again and to meet you for the first time in my capacity as Prime Minister. I had the great pleasure of attending, amongst other meetings in China, the G20, over which you presided, at a time of great hope for the international system and great progress under the banner of the G20. I look forward to further progress with your presidency of APEC next year. As you mentioned, our countries have a long history of cooperation, engagement, and trade. 55 years of diplomatic relations marked the anniversary 2 weeks ago. In recent years, we have not been as engaged. In fact, as you know, this is the first formal meeting between the Canadian Prime Minister and the President of the People's Republic of China for 8 years. Distance is not the way to solve problems, not the way to serve our people with people-centric growth, as you have advocated. Pragmatic and constructive engagement is, and I welcome the momentum that has been established.
The scene was understated but historic. Two leaders sitting across from one another, one representing the world's most populous nation, the other representing a country that has quietly become a model of stability and influence. But this was not just another diplomatic photo op. For Carney, this meeting represented a restoration of trust, the revival of a relationship frozen for nearly a decade. When Xi Jinping greeted him, the tone was unmistakably different from what we've seen in recent years. Smiles, measured laughter, and a visible sense of mutual respect filled the room. This was not how China greeted Trump's America leadership anymore. This was how China greeted Canada. Under Mark Carney, it wasn't about size or power, it was about credibility. And Carney brought that credibility back to the table in a way no Canadian leader has in years. Let's remember where we came from. For nearly 8 years, Canada's relationship with China was in deep freeze. High-level contact was minimal, diplomatic talks were stalled, and trade negotiations had all but vanished. Why? Because for years, Washington preferred it that way. The U.S. wanted Canada to remain dependent, economically, politically, and strategically, ensuring that any channel to Beijing ran through them first. It was a structure built on control, not cooperation. But Mark Carney is changing that. In less than a year, he's done what no one thought possible. He's reopened the door, and not by yielding, but by leading. He approached Beijing not as a desperate partner seeking favor, but as an equal, a country with something real to offer: innovation, stability, and strategic access to Western markets. This was Canada coming to the table not as a shadow of Washington's interests, but as an independent, confident power charting its own path. And China noticed.
I also welcome the invitation to come to China to further the dialogue, and I very much look forward to doing so, because it's through this constructive and pragmatic dialogue that we will address a path for current issues, that we will establish a road to seize the many great opportunities between our countries, and also to have the platform that's needed for the dialogue to help build a more sustainable, inclusive international system.
At the very same summit, President Xi also met Donald Trump, and the contrast was impossible to ignore. When Xi met Trump, his body language was rigid, his tone measured and restrained. The two men exchanged words but not warmth. It was a transactional encounter. Two powers locked in rivalry, not partnership. But just hours later, when Xi sat with Mark Carney, the tone flipped completely. There was ease, there was laughter, and there was something rarely seen in modern diplomacy: genuine rapport. That visual, Xi leaning in toward Carney, smiling, spoke louder than any statement. It showed that Carney's Canada has become the kind of nation even superpowers want to work with. And perhaps more tellingly, it showed how isolated Trump's America has become. For Beijing, the message is clear. Canada now represents stability, predictability, and principle. Everything Washington no longer does. What we're seeing is the execution of a long-term vision, one Carney laid out quietly when he took office. His strategy wasn't about confrontation. It was about connection. While Trump burned bridges, Carney built them. While others played short-term politics, Carney focused on long-term partnerships, from Southeast Asia to Europe, from energy cooperation to technology exchange. Canada is now at the center of multiple new trade frameworks designed to diversify away from the volatility of Washington. And now China, the world's second largest economy, is signaling that it wants to be part of that story. This is not about choosing sides between East and West. It's about restoring balance, ensuring that Canada's economy and diplomacy no longer rise or fall with America's mood swings.
This meeting today is long overdue. It has been 8 years since a Canadian Prime Minister has met with the President of China. We now have a turning point in the relationship, a turning point that creates opportunities for Canadian families, for Canadian businesses, and Canadian workers, and also creates a path to address current issues. So very pleased with the outcome of the meeting.
Then came the moment that truly changed the tone of the summit. At the close of their meeting, President Xi Jinping invited Mark Carney to make an official state visit to China. That invitation was more than symbolic, it was strategic. For China, extending a state visit to a Canadian leader signals something rare: recognition of Canada's renewed relevance on the world stage. And for Carney, it's validation. Proof that his patient, calculated approach to rebuilding Canada's international image is paying off. In diplomatic terms, this invitation was a standing ovation, not for Canada's past, but for its potential.
In his remarks, Xi congratulated Carney for becoming Prime Minister and noted that China-Canada relations have achieved a recovery and momentum towards positive development. Xi also invited Carney for a state visit, which the Prime Minister has accepted.
Carney's meeting with Xi is part of a much broader realignment. He's positioning Canada as the bridge, the country that major powers can rely on when others can't be trusted. While Trump continues to alienate allies and insult partners, Carney is building a web of relationships that give Canada leverage no matter which direction global politics turn. This is the strategy behind the handshake. Every new agreement with Asia or Europe strengthens Canada's independence and weakens Trump's influence. That's why this meeting matters far beyond APEC. It's a signal that the global balance of respect is shifting, And Canada is on the right side of that shift. To the world, this looked like a meeting about trade, but beneath the surface, it was about leadership. Xi Jinping knows that Carney represents a different kind of Western leader, one who doesn't see diplomacy as a competition, but as a calculation. And Carney knows that in the new geopolitical landscape, Canada's strength lies in its credibility. Every handshake, every photo, every word exchanged in that meeting sent the same message. Canada is no longer defined by its proximity to America. It's defined by its principles. And that's what separates Carney from Trump. Where Trump tries to dominate the world through threats, Carney influences it through trust. And in today's world, trust travels further than fear ever could. This meeting wasn't just a diplomatic formality, it was the confirmation of a new role for Canada. For decades, Canada was seen as the quiet partner, reliable, polite, but never leading. That perception is gone. Under Carney, Canada has become the balancing force between West and East, the nation that can sit across from Washington and Beijing and be respected by both. In a world fractured by ego and ideology, Carney's Canada represents something rare: clarity. And it's exactly what the global system has been waiting for. As cameras flashed and the two leaders shook hands, one thing became crystal clear: Canada is back. In less than a year, Mark Carney has repositioned this country from a regional ally to a global influence. Respected in Beijing, trusted in Brussels, and envied in Washington. Xi Jinping's warmth toward Carney wasn't just diplomatic politeness, it was respect. And his coldness toward Trump wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. It symbolized a new order, one where the world no longer looks to Washington for guidance, but to countries like Canada, for example. Carney's meeting with Xi was more than a summit sideline. It was a moment of realignment, the kind of moment that will be studied years from now as the point where Canada stopped following and started leading. And if Washington's frustration is any indication, Carney's strategy is not just working, it's winning. Because while Trump still clings to the past, Carney is already shaping the future. You're watching Canada Today, independent, factual, and unapologetically Canadian. Subscribe to stay informed as we cover the stories shaping our nation's place in the world.